A rancher and his horse found a burnt wagon. What they discovered was shocking. Dust drifts across the canyon as a lone rider pulls his horse to a halt. The wagon lies in ashes, its wheels blackened, its canvas torn to ribbons. But from inside, the charred wreck, a faint sound rises, a child's cry. The rancher pulls back the quilts, and his world changes forever. A terrified Apache girl, the only survivor. Bringing her home should have been simple kindness. But soon the church bell tolls, whispers spread through town, and the railroad men close in. Because hidden in the wreckage is more than a child's life. It's a deed to the water that greedy men will kill to possess. The barn goes up in flames. Hired guns ride through the night. Neighbors turn their backs in fear, and one rancher must choose between his own safety and the future of a child who now calls him father. Will faith and courage be enough to protect? Or will the West swallow them both? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The harsh morning wind cut through Jason's coat as he guided Dusty along the fence line. His breath came out in white puffs, mixing with the horse's steamy snorts. The sun hadn't yet climbed over the eastern rim of the canyon, leaving the world wrapped in blue-gray shadows. Jason's fingers, stiff with cold, gripped the reins as memories of warmer mornings drifted through his mind. Sarah used to wrap his, scarf just so, her gentle hands lingering at his collar. Little Mary would wave from the porch, her checkered dress bright against the weathered boards. But that was before the fever took them both, leaving nothing but empty chairs at the supper table and silence in the rooms they once filled with laughter. "Steady on, old friend," Jason murmured, as Dusty picked his way across the rocky ground. The horse's hooves made hollow sounds against the hard-packed earth, a rhythm that matched the lonely beating of Jason's heart by mid-morning. The sun had burned away the chill, but something wasn't right. Dusty's ears pricked forward, and his muscles tensed beneath the saddle. Jason spotted it then, a thin column of smoke rising against the clear sky, dark against the sandstone cliffs. "What do you reckon, boy?" Jason patted Dusty's neck, feeling the horse's unease. They approached carefully, the smoke growing thicker. The acrid smell of burnt wood and something worse reached them on the breeze. The wagon came into view, a blackened skeleton against the desert floor. Jason's throat tightened at the sight. The canvas cover had collapsed inward, charred remains of what must have been a family's whole world scattered across the ground. Twisted metal glinted in the sun, pot handles, wagon fittings, and the melted remains of a clock face. Jason dismounted, his boots crunching on ash-covered earth. "Hello?" He called out, though the destruction before him left little hope for an answer. "Anybody here?" Only the wind replied, whistling through the wagon's burnt ribs. He moved carefully through the wreckage, years of tracking experience, telling him this was no accident. The way the wagon had been positioned, hidden from the main trail, spoke of ambush. His hand strayed to the revolver at his hip as he surveyed the area. A trunk caught his eye, its leather scorched but largely intact. Something about its position, wedged beneath the wagon's bed, seemed deliberate. As he knelt beside it, a sound froze him in place, a whimper, so faint he might have imagined it. Jason's heart hammered as he worked the trunk free. The metal clasp was hot to the touch, but he managed to pry it open. Quilts filled the space, singed at the edges, but protecting something within. Another whimper, stronger this time. "Dear Lord," he breathed, carefully pulling back the layers. A small face emerged, streaked with soot. The Apache girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old, her dark eyes glazed with fear and exhaustion. "It's all right, little one," he said softly, though he knew she probably couldn't understand his words. "You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered, consciousness slipping away, as Jason gently lifted her from her hiding place. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, like a bird fallen from its nest. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and heat radiated. From her small body, whether from the trunk or fever, he couldn't tell, The sun was already sliding toward the horizon, painting the cliffs in deep orange. Jason looked toward town, a good 15 miles east. The proper thing would be to take her to the authorities, let them sort out what happened here. But something in his heart, a voice that sounded like Sarah's, told him that wasn't the right path. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Sarah used to say. Looking down at the unconscious child in his arms, Jason felt the truth of those words more than ever. He wrapped her carefully in his coat and mounted Dusty, settling her against his chest. The horse seemed to understand the precious nature of their cargo, moving with careful steps as they turned toward home. The last rays of sunlight caught the dust kicked up by Dusty's hooves, turning it to gold. Behind them, the mesas cast long shadows across the canyon, as if drawing a curtain over the tragedy they were leaving behind. Jason held the girl closer, feeling her heartbeat against his own. "Lord," he whispered into the gathering dusk, "guide us home." The wind carried his prayer across the empty land as they rode west, toward whatever tomorrow might bring. The moon hung high over Half Moon Creek Ranch when Jason finally guided Dusty through the gate. The girl hadn't stirred during their long ride, her small form cradled against his chest. Lamplight from the kitchen window cast a warm glow across the yard, welcoming them home like a beacon in the darkness. Jason's muscles protested as he dismounted, careful not to jostle his precious cargo. "Easy now," he whispered, more to steady himself than the unconscious child. The porch steps creaked beneath his boots, a familiar sound that somehow felt different tonight, as if the old house itself recognized something was changing. Inside, the kitchen's warmth round them like a blanket. Jason hesitated for just a moment before carrying the girl down the narrow hallway to Mary's room. The door hadn't been opened in 2 years, and the hinges complained with a soft whine. Everything remained exactly as it had been. The patchwork, quilt Sarah had sewn, the small wooden cross above the bed, and the rag doll sitting patiently in the rocking chair. "Lord, give me strength," Jason murmured as he laid the girl on Mary's cot. Dust motes danced in the lamplight he'd brought in, and the girl's face looked even more fragile in the golden glow. Her breathing was steady now, but her skin felt hot. To his touch, moving with purpose, Jason stoked the kitchen fire and set water to boil. His hands remembered the motions of caring for the sick, memories of Sarah's patient teaching guiding him as he mixed cornmeal into a thin mush. When the broth was ready, he returned to Mary's room and gently lifted the girl's head. "Here now, little one," he coaxed, bringing the spoon to her cracked lips. Just a sip. Her eyelids fluttered and she managed to swallow a little broth. After a few more careful spoonfuls, her eyes opened fully, dark and frightened and her soot-stained face. "You're safe here," Jason said softly. "Can you tell me your name?" She watched him warily, then whispered in halting English. "Taya, Taya," Jason repeated, smiling gently. "I'm Jason Boone. You're at my ranch now." He turned up the lamp and noticed. For the first time, the angry red burned on her arms where the quilts hadn't protected her. The sight made his heart clench. Setting aside the broth, he retrieved Sarah's jar of healing salve from the kitchen shelf, another thing he'd kept untouched since her passing, kneeling beside the cot. Jason bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed aloud, "thank you for guiding us. Give me wisdom to help this child. Give me courage for whatever comes." His voice caught on the last words, fear and gratitude tangling in his throat. The fire popped and crackled as he carefully applied the salve to Taya's burns. She winced but didn't pull away, watching his movements with solemn eyes. Jason found himself humming one of Sarah's old hymns, the way she used to when tending Mary's scrapes and fevers. Night deepened outside the windows, and Jason's thoughts turned to tomorrow. He should send word to Sheriff Doyle. That would be the proper thing to do. But he'd seen how the town treated Indian folks, heard the whispers and worse. The sheriff himself was more interested in keeping peace with the cattle syndicates than justice. No, telling Doyle would only bring trouble down this child who'd already seen too much darkness. Jason settled into the old rocking chair beside the cot, his joints protesting the long day. Taya had drifted off again, her face peaceful now despite the shadows under her eyes. The whitewashed walls held the lamp's glow, and for the first time in years, the room felt alive again. Not happy exactly, but no longer a shrine to what he'd lost. He meant to stay awake, to keep watch through the night, but exhaustion pulled him under. His dreams were a mixture of memory and worry. Sarah's smile, Mary's laugh, and Taya's frightened eyes all woven together like one of his wife's quilts. The rooster's crow startled him awake. Dawn light was creeping through the window, and for a moment, Jason feared it had all been a dream. Then the small voice spoke from the cot. Water. He turned to find Taya watching him, her eyes clearer now, though still holding shadows of all she'd been through. Something passed between them in that moment. Not trust exactly, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. A bridge starting to form across the gap between their separate worlds. Of course, Jason said, rising stiffly from the chair. I reckon we could both use some water and then maybe some breakfast. The morning sun climbed higher as Jason and Taya rode double on. Dusty, heading back toward the wagon site. He'd wrapped her in a thick wool blanket against the lingering dawn chill, her small frame pressed trustingly against his chest. The desert air grew warmer with each passing mile, and buzzards circled lazily overhead. Almost there, Jason murmured. More to himself than the child. Dusty's hooves kicked up dust from the dry earth, his steady gait carrying them closer to the scattered wreckage that now stood stark in the morning light. When they reached the burnt wagon, Jason dismounted first, then carefully lifted Taya down. Stay close, he instructed, tethering Dusty to a sturdy mesquite branch. The destruction looked even worse in daylight. Twisted metal, charred wood, and scattered belongings telling a story of sudden violence. Jason moved methodically through. The debris, pushing aside blackened canvas and splintered boards. The heat had warped everything it touched, leaving behind ghostly shapes of what had once been someone's possessions. Taya followed silently, her dark eyes taking in the ruins. Of what he suspected had been her family's wagon, the sun beat down mercilessly as Jason worked. Sweat trickled down his neck, and his throat drew dry with ash and dust. Then his boot struck something solid beneath a fallen beam. His heart sank as he cleared away more debris, revealing what he'd feared to find. 2 bodies, hastily covered by the wagon's collapse. Jason quickly stepped between Taya and the grim discovery. Child, go sit in the shade, he said gently, but firmly. She nodded, understanding in her eyes, and retreated to a nearby juniper tree. Removing his hat, Jason bowed his head. Lord, receive these souls into your keeping, he prayed softly. Grant them peace and give strength to those who mourn them. The desert wind carried his words away into the vast blue sky, returning to the scorched trunk where he'd found Taya. Jason examined it more carefully. His fingers found a slight gap in the bottom panel, a false bottom, cleverly concealed. Inside lay a Bible, its leather cover blackened but intact. As he lifted it out, several folded papers slipped from between its pages. Jason's hands trembled as he unfolded the first document. The territorial seal was still clear, and beneath it, in formal script, were words that made his breath catch. Hereby grant full water rights to Half Moon Creek and adjacent lands. The signatures at the bottom remained perfectly legible. Judge William Forsyth and Surveyor James McPherson, both names he recognized as territorial officials. Sweet Jesus, Jason whispered, understanding the significance. Half Moon Creek was the lifeblood of 3 counties, and these papers proved legal claim to its waters. No wonder the wagon had burned. Such documents would be worth killing for, especially to those who wanted to control the territory's water. A distant sound made Jason's head snap up. Riders approached from the eastern horizon, their shapes wavering in the heat haze. He quickly tucked the papers into his shirt and turned to Taya. Quick now, he whispered urgently, leading her to a dense patch of mesquite brush. Stay hidden, quiet as a mouse, no matter what you hear. Don't come out till I call. She nodded solemnly and disappeared into the thorny cover, showing a skill for concealment that spoke of previous need. Jason busied himself with the wagon debris, trying to appear casual as 3 riders approached. Their horses were well-bred, their gear expensive, not local ranchers or lawmen. The lead rider, a sharp-featured man in a city-cut coat, reined in nearby. "Morning," Jason called, touching his hat brim. "Rough business here." The man nodded curtly. "Railroad company business. We're checking on loose ends?" His eyes scanned the wreckage. "Found anything interesting?" "Just ash and broken things," Jason replied evenly, though his heart hammered against the papers in his shirt. "And 2 dead. God rest them." "Indeed." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, we'll take it from here. Best move along." Jason nodded, mounting Dusty with deliberate slowness. He rode a short distance away, then stopped as if adjusting his saddle. He watched through narrowed eyes as the men dismounted and began searching the wreck with suspicious thoroughness. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the railroad men remounted and rode off, heading west. Jason waited until they were well away before hurrying back to Taya's hiding place. "All clear, child," he called softly. She emerged like a shadow, unscratched by the mesquite thorns. Jason lifted her onto Dusty's back, then swung up behind her. Without a backward glance, they rode for home, the precious papers burning against his chest like a brand. His mind raced faster than Dusty's hooves could carry them. Those papers made Taya heir to Half Moon Creek and put her in terrible danger. The railroad men's presence confirmed his worst fears. This was bigger than a simple wagon fire, bigger than one orphan child. Someone wanted those water rights badly enough to kill for them. Jason's hands trembled slightly as he turned the key in his strongbox. The metal container sat heavy on his desk, worn from years of safeguarding important papers. He carefully placed the water rights documents inside, alongside his wife's Bible and his daughter's cherished photograph. The lock clicked shut with finality. In the kitchen, the aroma of baked cornbread mingled with simmering beans. Taya sat at the rough-hewn table, her small fingers tracing the wood grain patterns. Jason ladled 2 bowls full and set them down, along with thick slices of golden cornbread. "Hungry?" he asked, settling into his chair. Taya nodded, then pointed to the water pitcher. "Goda," she said softly, then added, "Water." Jason paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Goda," he repeated carefully. "That's Apache?" A smile flickered across her face. She nodded again, then touched the cornbread. "Tattle," she offered. "Tattle," Jason echoed, his pronunciation making her giggle for the first time. The sound warmed his heart like sunshine after rain. They continued their simple lesson through the meal, Taya sharing words while Jason listened intently, honored by each small piece of trust she placed in him. Night settled over the ranch, bringing with it a restless wind that rattled the shutters and whispered through cracks in the weathered walls. Jason sat in his chair by the fire, thinking hard. The territory lawyer in Silver Creek might help protect Taya's rights to Half Moon Creek, but telegraphing him would draw attention. News spread faster than wildfire in these parts, especially when water rights were involved. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams troubled by shadowy riders and burning wagons. Dawn painted the sky in soft pink when Jason woke to rooster. Crows. He found Taya already up, standing barefoot on the porch, watching the sunrise. Her dark hair caught the early light, reminding him painfully of his daughter at that age. "Want to help with morning chores?" He asked Dot. She turned eagerly, and Jason spent the next hour showing her the daily routine. Her quick mind absorbed everything. He taught. In the chicken coop, she gathered eggs with careful hands, tucking them into her gathered skirt. When he demonstrated how to sweep the porch, she took to the task naturally, humming softly as she worked. Later, as Taya fed kitchen scraps to the chickens, Jason watched her from the corral. A smile tugged at his weathered face. The first real joy he'd felt in years. But his moment of peace shattered when Dusty suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward. Jason scanned the horizon. A dust cloud approached from the south, growing larger by the minute. His heart quickened. Riders, at least two, moving fast. "Taya," he called quietly, trying to keep the urgency from his voice. "Come here, child." She must have sensed his tension because she came running. Jason led her quickly to the root cellar behind the house. He'd prepared it the night before, laying out blankets and filling a lantern with oil. "Stay quiet down here," he instructed, helping her down the ladder, like hiding in the mesquite yesterday. "Understand?" Taya nodded sullenly. Jason lit the lantern, settled her on the blankets, and closed the heavy door just as hoofbeats approached the house. Two men rode into the yard, their horses lathered from hard riding. Jason recognized their type immediately, ranch syndicate men, by their fine saddles and store-bought clothes. The lead rider, a narrow-faced man with cold eyes, dismounted. "First afternoon," Jason said evenly, leaning against his porch post. "What brings you gentlemen out this way?" "Looking for strangers," the man replied. "Maybe an Indian girl." "Seen anyone unusual lately?" Jason kept his face neutral, though his pulse quickened. "Can't say I have. Pretty quiet out here lately." The second man circled his horse, studying the yard. "Those look like fresh sweepings on your porch." "My home, my business," Jason said firmly. "If that's all, I've got work waiting." The narrow-faced man stared hard at Jason before nodding slowly. "Sure, but if you see anything unusual, let folks in town know." Jason watched them right away, waiting until the dust settled before retrieving Taya. When he opened the cellar door, she looked up at him with complete trust, and his heart clenched. He helped her climb out, then knelt to meet her eyes. "You're safe here," he said firmly, though worry gnawed at his gut. "I promise you that." Taya surprised him by reaching out to touch his cheek, her small hand cool against his sun-weathered skin. "Naigasin," she whispered. "Family." Jason didn't need a translation. The weight of responsibility settled more firmly on his shoulders, but it felt right. Whatever came next, he would protect her, this child who had brought light back into his empty home. Dawn-painted half-moon, creek's eastern sky in gentle pinks and golds as Jason hitched the buckboard wagon. He'd spent half the night worrying over Taya's burns, knowing they needed proper treatment. The old Mars stomped impatiently while he checked the hardest straps one final time. Taya emerged from the house, wrapped in his late daughter's shawl, her dark eyes wide with uncertainty. Jason lifted her onto the wagon seat, tucking a blanket around her legs against the morning chill. "Town's a fair piece," he explained, climbing up beside her. "Might be some folk ain't used to seeing Apache." "Folk, but don't you fret none." The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, following rugged trails that wound through scrub and mesquite. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs. Taya watched everything with keen interest. Jackrabbits darting through brush, hawks circling overhead, distant mesas rising purple against the sky. 4 hours passed before the town's wooden buildings came into view. Jason felt Taya stiffen beside him as they approached the bustling main street. Her small hand clutched his arm, and he patted it gently. "Stay close now," he murmured. They hadn't gone 20 feet before the whispers started. Jason heard them clearly as he helped Taya down from the wagon. "That's Jason Boone, bringing in an Indian girl. Ought to be with our own kind." Jason kept his expression neutral, guiding Taya toward Miller's general store. The bell jingled. As they entered, and old Mr. Miller looked up from his ledger, spectacles slipping down his nose. "Morning, Jason," he said carefully, eyes fixed on Taya. "Need some poultices and clean cloth," Jason said, his tone matter-of-fact, "and a few yards of calico, if you've got any suitable for a young lady." While Miller gathered the supplies, Taya stayed close to Jason's side, her fingers working nervous, patterns in her shawl. He added a stick of peppermint candy to his purchase, pressing it into her hand with a gentle wink. The apothecary shop smelled of herbs and Mrs. Whitcomb. The preacher's wife looked up from her mortar and pestle, her kind face breaking into a warm smile. "Jason Boone, as I live and breathe," she said, coming around the counter. She knelt before Taya, her voice gentle. "And who might this precious child be?" "This here's Taya," Jason said, touched by the woman's genuine warmth. Mrs. Whitcomb examined. Taya's burns with experienced hands, poor lamb. "Here, I've got just a thing." She bustled about, gathering dried herbs and explaining their use. "Steep these in hot water, make a compress. And I'll pray for swift healing, dear one." Jason reached for his wallet, but Mrs. Whitcomb waved him off. "The good book says to help those in need. You take good care of her, Jason Boone." Outside, the mid-afternoon sun beat down on the dusty street. Jason was helping Taya into the wagon when Sheriff Doyle approached, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "Word travels fast, Boone," the sheriff said, his voice low. "Found yourself some trouble, I hear." "No trouble, Sheriff. Just a child needing care." Doyle glanced around, then stepped closer. "Look here, best turn her over to the Indian Agency. Save yourself a heap of bother. Folks round here get mighty particular about such things." Jason straightened, meeting the sheriff's gaze. "Much obliged for your concern," he said firmly, "but the girl stays with me." "Your funeral," Doyle muttered, turning away. "Don't say I didn't warn you." The ride home seemed longer, shadows stretching as the sun westered. Jason mulled over the day's events, Mrs. Whitcomb's kindness against the cold whispers, the sheriff's warning against his own certainty. Beside him, Taya dozed, her head resting trustingly against his arm. Evening settled over the ranch as Jason prepared a simple supper of salt pork and potatoes. Taya set out plates, moving about his kitchen as if she'd always belonged there. "You're home now," he told her as they sat down to eat. "Don't matter what anyone says." A soft nickering interrupted them. Both turned to see Dusty's long face pushed through the open kitchen window, nostrils flaring hopefully at the smell of food. "That old horse," Jason chuckled, reaching for the oat bin. "Reckon he thinks it's his supper time, too." Taya giggled as Dusty's whiskers tickled her palm while taking the offered oats. The sound of their shared laughter filled the kitchen, chasing away the shadows of doubt that the town's whispers had stirred. Looking at her bright eyes and smile, Jason knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever trouble might come, they'd face it together. The days flowed like the creek waters, steady and sure. Morning light found Jason and Taya settling into rhythms as natural as breathing. In the kitchen, Jason showed her how to work the hand-cranked mill, their fingers dusty with cornmeal as golden streams poured into the wooden bowl below. "Like this?" Taya asked, turning the handle with careful attention. "That's just right," Jason nodded, pride warming his voice. "Smooth and steady wins the race." Outside, autumn winds rustled through cottonwoods as they gathered kindling. Jason demonstrated how to coil rope around bundles of dry branches, his weathered hands guiding her smaller ones through the motions. "Tight now," he instructed. "That's how we keep it neat." Before each meal, they bowed their heads together. Jason's deep voice mingled with Taya's soft one, giving thanks for daily bread and safety. Sometimes Taya would add words in Apache, her native prayer flowing like music. "Ta," she told him one morning, pointing to his water cup. "It means water." "Ta," Jason repeated carefully, earning her bright smile. "Gawa," she said next, touching the cabin wall. "Home." Jason's heart swelled when she looked up at him and whispered, "Shije, father." The old chicken coop needed work, its boards weathered and loose. Jason gathered tools while Taya carried nails in her apron pocket. Together they straightened warped planks and hammered them true. "Hold it steady now," Jason guided, showing her how to aim the hammer. When she bent a nail, giggles bubbled up like spring water. "You should have seen my first tries," Jason chuckled. "Looked like a porcupine got loose in the lumber pile." The afternoon sun cast long shadows when hoofbeats approached. Jason tensed, but it was only young Tommy from the telegraph office, dust coating his horse's flanks. "Message for you, Mr. Boone," Tommy called, holding out a yellow envelope. Jason's stomach nodded as he read the telegram's contents. Railroad surveyors were pressing their claim on Half Moon Creek, citing water rights essential for steam engines. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Everything all right? Taya asked, nail hammer forgotten. Just business matters, Jason assured her, forcing a smile. Why don't you check on those chickens? That night, after Taya was asleep, Jason spread the land grant papers across his desk. The lamp burned low as he studied every word, searching for anything to strengthen their position. Outside, storm clouds gathered like armies, thunder rolling across the mesas. Wind rattled the shutters as rain began to fall. In the barn, horses whinnied nervously. Jason rose to check on them, pausing in the doorway of Taya's room. She slept peacefully, untroubled by the storm's fury. Back in his room, Jason sank to his knees beside the bed. Lord, he whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough for what's coming. But this child needs protection, needs a home. Help me. Find the way. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room. In that brief brightness, Jason's eyes fell on his family Bible. Peace settled over him like a warm blanket. Dawn broke crystal clear, the storm's passage leaving everything fresh-washed. And gleaming, Jason found Taya already up, feeding chickens in the yard. Want to ride down to the creek? He asked. Her face lit up. Yes, please. They mounted Dusty together, Jason lifting her up before him. The morning air carried hints of sage and wet earth. As they rode toward Half Moon Creek, water sparkled in the sunlight, rushing over smooth stones. At the creek bank, Taya slipped down from the saddle. She approached the water's edge, head bowed in reverence. Soft Apache words flowed from her lips. Ancient prayers passed down through generations. Jason watched, understanding in his heart, if not his ears. This land, this water, it was more than property to be bought and sold. It was life itself, sacred trust, passed from father to child. Taya finished her prayer and turned to him, eyes bright with belonging. Ta, she said again, then smiled. Our water. That's right, Jason agreed, gathering her close. Our water. Our home. Dusty nickered softly, drinking from the clear stream. Above them, a red-tailed hawk circled on morning thermals, its cry echoing across the canyon. Here by the singing creek, with his daughter's hand in his, Jason felt his renewed courage settle deep in his bones. Whatever storms might come, they would weather them together. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Jason helped Taya smooth down her new dress, sewn from his late wife's carefully stored calico fabric. The pattern of tiny blue flowers reminded him of springs long past, but seeing it worn again brought fresh joy rather than sorrow. There now, he said, adjusting the white collar, pretty as a prairie rose. Taya touched the fabric reverently. It's beautiful, she whispered, twirling once to watch the skirt float. The buggy ride to town took nearly an hour, gust rising behind their wheels. Taya sat straight beside Jason, her small hands folded in her lap. As they approached the white-painted church, its bell tolling across the valley, she pressed closer to his side. It'll be all right, Jason assured her, helping her down from the seat. They climbed the wooden steps together. Inside, lamplight gleamed on polished pews and hymn books, waited in neat rows. As they entered, conversations stuttered to silence. Whispers rippled through the congregation like wind through prairie grass. Did you ever think? The Boone girl's dress, Indian child in church. Jason felt Taya's hand tighten in his. But before discomfort could take root, Pastor Whitcomb strode forward, his weathered Bible tucked under one arm. Welcome, welcome. He called warmly, extending both hands to them. Jason, we've missed you these Sundays. And this must be Miss Taya. We're so glad you've joined us today. The pastor's genuine smile seemed to ease the tension in the room. They settled into a pew near the back, Taya's shoulders gradually relaxing. As the organ began to play, Pastor Whitcomb's sermon that morning spoke straight to Jason's heart. The preacher's voice rang clear as he described God's family growing not just through birth, but through love and choice. Consider how our heavenly Father adopts us all as his children, Pastor Whitcomb declared, his kind eyes sweeping the congregation. Not through accident of birth, but through the deliberate embrace of love. We are all his family, brought together by grace. Jason felt tears prick his eyes as Taya leaned against his shoulder. The words seemed meant just for them, though they spoke to all Dot after the service. Mrs. Whitcomb hurried over, her gray curls bouncing beneath her Sunday bonnet. She gathered Taya into a warm embrace. "My dear child," she said softly, "you must join us for hymn practice. The children would love to have you." Taya looked questioningly at Jason, who nodded encouragement. Soon she stood with the other children, near the organ, their young voices rising in "Jesus loves me." At first, Taya only mouthed the words, but gradually her voice joined in, clear and sweet. During the second verse, she began adding Apache words between the English lines, weaving them together like a beautiful tapestry. The other children listened in wonder, some trying to copy her native words. Mrs. Whitcomb beamed from her place at the organ, nodding in time. "Stay for supper," Pastor Whitcomb insisted afterward. Sarah's made plenty. Around the Whitcombs' dining table, over plates of roast chicken and cornbread, Jason felt tension he had not even noticed begin to ease. Here were all eyes who saw Taya's worth, who understood family could grow beyond blood. "She's a blessing," Mrs. Whitcomb declared, passing Taya a second helping of apple pie. "Such a lovely child." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," her husband agreed. "Bringing you two together, well, seems pretty clear to me." The afternoon sun was lowering as Jason and Taya finally headed home. They had just turned onto Main Street when movement caught Jason's eye. A man in a railroad company hat stood watching them from the shadow of the telegraph office. As their buggy passed, he tipped his brim with deliberate slowness, his smile never reaching his eyes. Jason felt cold despite the warm evening. He recognized that calculated look, had seen it too, often in land disputes that turned ugly. Beside him, Taya had gone very still, back at the ranch. Jason took extra care with the evening locks, sliding heavy bolts into place at every door. The peaceful feeling of the morning seemed far away now. "Must I go away?" Taya's small voice came. From behind him, Jason turned to find her standing in her blue calico dress, eyes wide with worry. His heart clenched at the fear in her face. Kneeling down, he took her hands in his. "No, little one," he said firmly. "You're my family now. Nobody's going to change that." She searched his face, then nodded slowly, trust winning over fear. "Family?" She repeated softly, first in English, then in Apache, making it doubly true. The July sun baked the earth golden brown, but life flourished in the small garden behind Jason's ranch house. Taya knelt in the soft dirt, her hands gentle around tender tomato plants as she pulled weeds. Jason watched from the porch, his heart warming at how naturally she took to ranch life. "Look," she called, holding up a ripe tomato. "First one of summer. That'll taste mighty fine with supper," Jason replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. Their days fell into pleasant rhythms. Each morning, they tended the animals together, feeding chickens, checking on the new calves, and making sure Dusty had fresh water. Taya had a way with the young cattle, speaking to them softly in Apache as she helped bottle feed the orphaned ones. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the creak of wagon wheels announced visitors. The Martinez family from the neighboring ranch pulled up in their buckboard, Sarah Martinez clutching a fresh-baked apple pie. "Thought we'd stop by," Tom Martinez said, helping his wife down. Their 3 children peered curiously at Taya from behind their mother's skirts. Jason welcomed them, though his spine stiffened slightly. They hadn't had many visitors since Taya came, but Sarah's warm smile seemed genuine as she pressed the pie into Jason's hands. "We've been meaning to come by," she said. "It's not right for neighbors to be strangers." While the adults settled on the porch with coffee, the Martinez children slowly drew Taya into a game of chase around the yard. Soon, laughter filled the air, Spanish, English, and Apache words mixing freely as the children played. "She's a sweet girl," Sarah observed quietly, watching them. "Got a gentle way about her." Jason nodded, grateful for their acceptance. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine more evenings like this, peaceful gatherings of neighbors, Children playing without fear or prejudice. But the very next morning, that dream shattered. Jason was mending fence posts when he heard horses approaching. 3 riders appeared, their clean suits and polished boots marking them as railroad men. The leader, a sharp-featured man Jason recognized from town, reined his horse to a stop. "Mr. Boone," he said, his voice smooth as creek stones. "I'm Silas Markham, representing the railroad company. We need to discuss some matters concerning your property and a certain survivor from that unfortunate wagon incident." Jason's hand tightened on the fence post. "Nothing to discuss," he said evenly. "This is private land." Markham's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We have reason to believe you're harboring someone with questionable claims to water rights. The company has legal interests in Half Moon Creek. It would be better for all involved if you cooperated. My land, my creek." Jason stood straight, meeting Markham's gaze. "And my family ain't your business." "Family?" Markham's laugh held no humor. "Is that what you're calling it? The law might see things differently. The law says this creek belongs to its rightful heir," Jason replied, thinking of the papers in his strongbox. "Now I'll thank you to ride on." The 3 men exchanged glances. "Consider carefully, Mr. Boone," Markham said. "The railroad doesn't take kindly to interference." They wheeled their horses and rode away, leaving dust and threat hanging in the air. That evening, Jason's hands trembled slightly as he lit the lamp for supper. Taya sat at the table quietly, sensing his unease. After their meal of beans and cornbread, Jason opened his old Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. "Be strong and courageous," he read aloud, his voice growing steadier. "Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Taya leaned against his arm, her presence both comfort and responsibility. As he spoke the ancient words of faith, Jason felt his own courage strengthening. Whatever came, they would face it together. Later, as he tucked Taya into bed, movement caught his eye through the window. In the fading light, he noticed fresh tracks near the barn. Boot prints that hadn't been there that morning got after Taya fell asleep. Jason settled into his chair by the front window, shotgun across his lap. The night stretched long and dark, broken only by coyote calls and the distant whistle of a train. He kept his vigil until dawn, thoughts churning but spirit steady. When morning finally came, they shared a quiet breakfast of coffee and biscuits. Neither spoke of the tracks, or the threats, or the watching eyes they both felt. Instead, Taya reached across the table and took Jason's weathered hand in her small one. Squeezing gently, Dot in that simple gesture lay all that needed saying, "Babe, we're family now." Come what may, dawn painted the eastern sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. As Jason and Taya made their way down to Half Moon Creek, Dusty's hooves crunched softly on the rocky trail, carrying them both toward the water that had sustained Jason's ranch for decades. The creek stretched before them like polished silver, its surface mirror smooth in the early light. Tall mountains reflected in the water, their peaks touched with morning sun. Jason helped Taya dismount, watching her bare feet touch the cool grass along the bank. "Here's a good spot," he said, setting down their simple fishing gear, 2 poles wrapped in twine and a tin of worms. The familiar motions of baiting hooks and casting lines brought comfort after yesterday's threats. Taya settled beside him on a sun-warmed rock, her small hands steady on her fishing pole. As they waited for fish to bite, she began to sing softly. In Apache, a melody that rose and fell like the creek's own voice. Though Jason didn't understand the words, the song spoke of water and earth, of family and home-peace, settled over him like a familiar blanket. The morning sun warmed his shoulders as Taya's clear voice mingled with birdsong and flowing water. Here, he thought, was proof of God's grace. This moment of quiet joy with his adopted daughter. But their peace shattered as Jason spotted dark smoke rising above the trees. In the direction of the ranch, his heart lurched. "Something's wrong," he said, already gathering their gear. "Hold tight to me." They mounted Dusty in one fluid motion, Taya's arms wrapping around Jason's waist. He spurred the horse into a gallop, fear rising with every hoofbeat. As they crested the last rise, Jason's worst fears proved true. The barn was engulfed in flames. Orange tongues licked the weathered boards as black smoke boiled skyward. Panicked, cattle and horses scattered across the pasture, their frightened calls filling the air. The fire roared like a hungry beast, consuming everything in its path. "Stay by the house," Jason shouted as he leaped from Dusty's back. He ran toward the barn, hearing trapped horses screaming inside. The heat struck him like a physical blow as he fought to reach the doorstop behind him. Taya's terrified cry pierced the air. Jason whirled to see 3 masked men emerging from the brush, their hands reaching for her. His heart stopped. "No!" he roared, abandoning the barn and charging toward them. But another attacker appeared from nowhere, swinging a fence post that caught Jason across the shoulders. Pain exploded through him as he crashed to the ground, through waves of agony. Jason struggled to rise. Smoke stung his eyes as he watched helplessly while the men dragged Taya toward waiting horses. Her screams tore at his soul. "Jason, father." She fought like a wild thing, but they were too strong. He forced himself up, only to be struck down. Again. The last thing he saw through the thick smoke was Taya being carried away. Her small form disappearing into the chaparral as hoofbeats faded. The barn collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the morning sky. Jason lay in the dirt, every breath bringing fresh waves of pain. Hours passed as the fire gradually died, leaving only smoking ruins and scattered livestock as evening shadows lengthened. Jason remained where he had fallen. His prayers rose like smoke, desperate whispers into the blood-stained dirt. "Please, Lord, please, help me find her." Night fell, stars appearing one by one above the scorched earth. Jason barely noticed the cold or his injuries. His whole world had narrowed to one thought. Taya was gone. The first gray light of dawn brought the sound of approaching wagons. Tom Martinez and other neighbors arrived, bringing water barrels and strong backs to help douse the still smoldering. "Embers. Good Lord, Jason," Tom said, helping him to his feet. "What happened here?" Jason's voice was rough with smoke and grief. "Railroad men. They took Taya." Sarah Martinez pressed a cool cloth to his bloodied face, but Jason barely felt it. His eyes, hard as steel, fixed on the horizon where Taya had disappeared. "I'm bringing her back," he said, each word carved in stone, "no matter what it takes. No matter how far I have to go." His voice dropped to a whisper that held more threat than any shout. "No matter the cost." The neighbors exchanged worried glances, but none dared argue with the iron determination in Jason's voice. They understood. This quiet rancher had found something worth fighting for, and heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The morning after the attack, Jason's body screamed with every movement. His ribs felt like shattered glass under his skin, and burns dotted his arms where embers had found flesh. But he couldn't rest, wouldn't rest. Not with Taya out there somewhere, scared and alone. Tom and Sarah Martinez worked alongside him, helping gather scattered cattle from the surrounding brush. Other neighbors arrived with tools and strong backs, securing what remained of the fence line and salvaging what they could from the barn's ashes. The community's quiet support spoke louder than words. "Found your smithing hammer," Pete Wilson called out, pulling the tool from the debris. "Handle's scorched, but the head's still good." Jason nodded thanks, each movement sending fresh pain through his chest. Sarah tried to make him sit, to drink water at least, but he pushed through. Every moment of rest felt like betrayal. By afternoon, Pastor Wickham's wagon rattled up the dusty road. The preacher's weathered face was drawn with concern as he approached Jason. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Pastor Wickham said softly, "but he never abandons his children." "Where was he when they took her?" Jason's voice cracked like dry kindling. The pastor placed a steady hand on Jason's shoulder. "The same place. He was when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, working to turn evil into good. But you must lean on faith, Jason, and on your neighbors." "I'll kill them," Jason whispered, hands clenching. "Every last one who touched her. That's not your path, son." Pastor Whitcomb's voice carried the weight of Scripture. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. Justice, not revenge, is his way and yours. The words cut through Jason's rage like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. He drew a ragged breath, remembering Taya's prayers at bedtime, her trust in God's love. After the neighbors left, darkness settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Jason lit a lamp and opened his strongbox, spreading the scorched land grant papers across the kitchen table. His fingers traced the judge's signature, the careful survey marks showing Half Moon Creek's boundaries. This is what they're after, he murmured. Not just silencing Taya, they want to erase her claim completely. The realization settled like cold lead in his stomach. Without these papers, and without Taya, the railroad could seize the water rights unopposed. Sleep refused to come. Long before dawn, Jason settled Dusty, ignoring his protesting ribs. He had one hope left, a man he'd heard tell of but never met. Henry Keene, former Army scout, lived in a cabin up near Thompson's Ridge. The sun was barely touching the eastern peaks when Jason found the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a lean figure stood in the doorway, rifle ready, but not quite aimed. "State your business," the man called out, voice rough as creek gravel. Jason dismounted carefully, ribs screaming. "Are you Henry Keene?" "Depends who's asking." "Jason Boone. I need help tracking some men who took my girl." Henry stepped into the light, tall, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. Heard about the fire, and about the Apache child. Jason tensed, but Henry waved him inside. The cabin was spare but neat, with maps tacked to the walls and well-oiled weapons on pegs. "I rode scout against the Apache," Henry said, pouring coffee into tin cups. "Did things I ain't proud of. Followed orders that went against God's law." He stared into his cup. "Seen too many children torn from their people. Then help me find her," Jason said. "She's just a little girl. She loves hymns and helping with the chickens. She calls me father." Henry was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he set down his cup. "I owe a debt to children like her. Maybe helping you find her starts to pay it." He stood, stretching. "Give me 10 minutes to pack." They rode out as morning light spilled across the foothills. Henry studied the ground like reading a book, noting broken twigs and scattered pebbles that Jason would have missed. 4 riders, headed southeast, Henry said. 1 horse, carrying. "Double, that'd be your girl. They're pushing hard, but not as fast as they could. They feel safe." His mouth set in a grim line. "That's their mistake." Jason touched his ribs, feeling the pain, but pushing it aside. Somewhere ahead, Taya was waiting. He would find her. With God's help and Henry's, he would bring her home. The 2 men urged their horses forward, following the trail and into the rising sun. Justice, not vengeance, Jason reminded himself. But first, they had to find her. Dawn painted the mountain ridges in soft gold as Jason and Henry broke camp. 3 days of hard riding had left them both dust-covered and weary, but determination drove them forward. Jason's ribs still ached with each movement, though the sharp pain had dulled to a constant throb. Henry knelt by faint tracks in the sandy soil, his weathered fingers tracing marks most men would miss. "They're staying to harder ground when they can," he muttered, squinting at the terrain ahead. "Smart, makes them harder to follow." Jason adjusted his saddle cinch, trying not to wince. "But you can still track them?" "Ain't lost a trail yet when I set my mind to it." Henry straightened with a grunt. Though these fellows know their business. They're professionals, not just ranch hands playing tough. They mounted up, letting their horses pick their way through the rocky terrain. The morning air held autumn's bite, and their breath frosted in small clouds. As they rode, Henry shared tracking wisdom, how broken twigs told of passing riders, how scattered pebbles marked fresh hoofprints, how to read the land's story written in dust and stone. Near midday, they paused in a sheltered draw to rest the horses. Jason pulled jerky and hard biscuits from his saddlebags, sharing the meager meal. The sun beat down from overhead, harsh and unforgiving. "Tell me about the girl," Henry said suddenly, breaking their usual quiet. "What makes her worth all this? Trouble to them?" Jason studied the distant peaks for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his coat and withdrew the scorched land grant papers, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. These were in the wagon where I found her. Legal deeds to Half Moon Creek's water rights, signed by a territorial judge. Henry's eyes narrowed as he examined the documents. Railroad's been buying up water rights all through the territory. Or taking them when buying don't work. Taya's the last living heir to these rights, Jason explained, his voice tight. With her gone, there's no one to contest their claim. Makes her dangerous to them. Henry handed the papers back. And not just to the railroad. Corrupt lawmen, ranch syndicates, anyone who profits from stealing water rights. He spat into the dust. Seen it before. Justice gets mighty flexible when there's money involved. They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape growing more rugged. Patches of scrub oak gave way to bare rock and steep draws. Their horses picked their way carefully along game trails and ancient Apache paths. As dusk approached, Henry raised his hand in warning. Ahead, smoke rose thin against the darkening sky. They dismounted and crept forward on foot, keeping to cover. In a small box canyon, 5 armed men lounged around the campfire. Nearby, a herd of cattle milled restlessly in a makeshift corral of rope and brush. Brand marks had been crudely altered, but Jason recognized the original marks of several homesteader families. Hired guns, Henry whispered. Running stolen cattle, while they wait for orders. His face was grim in the fading light. We should move on. Stay on Taya's trail. But Jason couldn't look away from those cattle. He thought of the homesteader families he knew, good people trying to scratch out a living from unforgiving land. These stolen animals might mean the difference between survival and starvation for them. We have to help them, he said quietly. Expression hardened. Every hour we delay gives those men more time to move Taya further away. Or worse. I know. Jason touched the cross he wore under his shirt. But this is right. Those families need their cattle back. For a long moment, Henry said nothing. Finally, he sighed. You're a stubborn fool. But maybe you're right. He studied the camp carefully. We'll wait till full dark. Men create a distraction to scatter their horses. In the confusion, we can cut the cattle loose. They spent the next hours planning, watching the camp's routine. As true night fell, bringing a chorus of coyote song, they put their plan in motion. Henry circled wide to the south, while Jason worked his way closer to the picketed horses. The crack of Henry's rifle shot shattered the night's quiet. As the guards scrambled for weapons, Jason slapped the nearest horse hard across its flank. The animal bolted, starting a chain reaction of panic through the other mounts. In the chaos of shouting men and fleeing horses, Jason and Henry cut the ropes holding the cattle. The herd, already nervous, needed little encouragement to stampede into the darkness. The guards fired wildly but couldn't risk hitting their own scattered mounts. An hour later, safely away from the camp, Jason and Henry began gathering and turning the cattle. By midnight, they had the herd mostly under control, moving steadily toward the nearest homesteads. Dawn found them delivering cattle to grateful families. Women wept with relief. Men clasped their hands in speechless thanks. Children gazed in wonder at the returning animals. Jason's heart lifted at each reunion, though worry for Taya never left him. That evening, they made camp in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods. The day's delay weighed heavy on Jason's mind, but the memory of those thankful faces eased his conscience. As Henry tended the horses, Jason knelt in the gathering darkness to pray. Lord, he whispered, give me strength for what's ahead. Help me find her. Show me the path to justice, not vengeance. He thought of Taya's smile, her trust in him. Keep her safe until I can bring her home. Henry's voice startled him. Been a long time since I heard a man pray like that. The old scout settled nearby, feeding small sticks into their fire. Makes me remember things I tried to forget. Times I should have prayed instead of just following orders. They shared a quiet meal of beans and coffee. As the stars wheeled overhead, Henry spoke haltingly of his years as an army scout, of battles that haunted him, of children torn from families, of choices that weighed on his soul. Jason listened. Without judgment, understanding that some burdens needed voice to be borne. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They found fresh tracks leading east, horses moving fast but not running. Henry's face lit with recognition. They're heading for Half Moon Creek, he said, studying the sign, following the old supply trail through Thompson's Gap. Jason's heart quickened. How far? 2 days' ride, maybe less. Henry remounted, eyes scanning the horizon. But they'll have men watching the approaches. Getting close won't be easy. Don't need easy, Jason said quietly. Just need possible. They rode on, following the trail toward the rising sun. Jason touched his ribs, feeling the familiar ache. The pain reminded him he was alive, still fighting, still believing. Somewhere ahead, Taya waited. With God's help, he would find her. With justice in his heart, he would make things right. The rocky peaks of Half Moon Creek's watershed rose before them, stark against the morning sky. Jason studied those unforgiving heights, knowing the final confrontation drew near. Fear flickered in his chest, but faith burned stronger. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with courage born of conviction. Henry nudged his horse closer. You ready for this, Boone? Jason nodded, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Ready as prayer can make me. Together they urged their mounts. Forward, following the trail that would lead them to Taya, and to whatever test of faith awaited them at Half Moon Creek. The eastern sky painted Half Moon Creek in pale gold as Jason and Henry crouched behind a screen of juniper. Below them, a makeshift camp sprawled along the creek bank. 6 armed men lounged near cooking fires, rifles close at hand. Jason's heart clenched when he spotted Taya. She sat tied to a cottonwood, her dark hair tangled, dressed dirty from the journey. Near the water's edge, a well-dressed man in a black coat spread papers across a folding table. Even at this distance, Jason recognized railroad agent Markham's sleek manner. Beside him stood a portly figure Jason knew, Judge Matthews from the Territorial Court. The same man whose signature graced Taya's original deeds. They're forging new papers, Jason whispered, touching the burnt Bible in his coat where the real documents lay hidden. Trying to make it all look legal-like, Henry studied the camp through narrowed eyes. 8 men total, 2 by the girl, 3 near the fires. Rest scattered. He glanced at Jason. You sure about this plan? Jason nodded slowly. Truth's got power of its own. Just need witnesses to see it. He pointed to the ridge behind them where thin tendrils of white smoke rose from the signal fires. Henry had carefully built and lit before dawn. Townsfolk will come. Pastor Whitcomb knows that smoke means trouble. Trouble. Still a mighty big risk. Henry checked his rifle. Those men ain't likely to surrender quiet-like when you call them out. That's why I need you watching over Taya. Jason's voice was soft but firm. Get her free while I keep their attention. Whatever happens to me, make sure she's safe. The old scout's weathered face creased with concern. You're asking to die walking in there alone? No. Jason touched the cross at his throat. I'm asking to trust. The Lord didn't bring me this. Far to fail now. They shared a long look. Finally, Henry nodded. I'll work my way around to the creek side. Wait for your signal. He gripped Jason's shoulder. The good book says there's a time for peace and a time for war. Just make sure you know which this is. I reckon it's time for truth, Jason answered quietly. The rest is in God's hands. They separated, Henry moving like a shadow through the brush while Jason led his horse down the main trail. His ribs ached with each step, but he kept his back straight. The burnt Bible pressed against his chest, reminder of all they had brought. Him here. 20 paces from the nearest fire. A guard spotted him. Hold it right there. Rifles snapped up as Jason kept walking, hands raised slightly. Name's Jason Boone, he called clearly. Come to speak with Agent Markham about Half Moon Creek. The agent looked up sharply from his papers. His smooth face showed annoyance rather than surprise. Mr. Boone, I was wondering when you'd appear. He gestured lazily. Search him. Rough hands patted Jason down, finding no weapons. He stood calmly as Markham approached, the judge trailing behind. I must admit you've been quite troublesome, Markham said. Hiding evidence, harboring a fugitive, interfering with company business. He smiled thinly. Though I suppose we should thank you for delivering the girl right to us. Taya ain't evidence or a fugitive, Jason answered steadily. She's a child with legal right to this water. Same as these are legal documents. He drew the scorched Bible from his coat, removing the folded deeds. The judge's face paled slightly. As Jason held up the papers, Markham's smile never wavered. Unfortunate that you've involved yourself in matters beyond your understanding, the agent said. This creek's fate was decided long ago. The railroad's expansion cannot be stopped by, he waved dismissively. Questionable claims. Nothing questionable about your signature, is there, Judge? Jason's voice carried across the camp. Same. Signature you're about to put on those forged papers there. Matthews tugged at his collar, sweat beading despite the cool morning. Now see here. No, you see here. Jason's tone hardened. I've got witnesses coming. Folks will testify these are genuine deeds, signed in good faith. Folks will stand against any man trying to steal from an orphan child. As if in answer, horses appeared on the ridge trail. Pastor Wickham led a group of townsfolk, drawn by Henry's signal fires. They reined in at the camp's edge, watching intently. Markham's smile finally slipped. This changes nothing. The girl has no guardian, no standing. The court will. I'm her guardian, Jason cut in. By right of conscience and the law of God, and I aim to see justice done. Movement caught his eye, Henry working his way behind. The cottonwood where Taya sat. The old scout's knife flashed once, twice, cutting her bonds. She remained still, waiting. This is absurd, Markham snapped. Sheriff, arrest this man for what? Pastor Whitcomb's voice rang out as he dismounted. For protecting a child? For preserving legal documents? For standing against theft? More riders appeared. Ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers. The camp was suddenly ringed with witnesses. Markham's gunmen shifted uneasily, weapons wavering. Judge Matthews, the pastor continued, would you care to examine those original deeds? Perhaps compare them to what you were about to sign? The judge seemed to shrink under the townfolk's stares. He looked desperately at Markham. The railroad assured me. The railroad lied, Jason said quietly. Just like they lied about the wagon fire, just like they're lying now. He held out the papers. Truth's plain as day, if you've eyes to see it. For a long moment, silence held the camp. Then one of the hired guns lowered his rifle. Another followed. Markham's face twisted with rage. You fool, he snarled at the judge. Sign those papers or what? Henry's voice was cold as mountain steel. He stood behind Taya now, rifle ready. Threaten a judge in front of witnesses? Add that to attempted murder, kidnapping, and fraud. The remaining gunmen began backing away. They'd signed on for intimidation, not a public showdown. One by one, they mounted up and rode out. Markham watched them go, his careful mask cracking. Judge Matthews slumped, years of compromise weighing visible on his shoulders. The deeds are genuine, he said heavily. I remember signing them. The girl's claim is legal and binding. He faced the watching crowd. I witnessed this freely, before God and man. A murmur ran through the townsfolk. Markham looked wildly around, finding no allies left. With a curse, he grabbed his satchel of forged papers and ran for his horse. No one tried to stop him. Taya, Jason called softly. Come here, child. She flew across the camp into his arms. He held her close, feeling her. Tears soaked his shirt. You came? She whispered in Apache. You found me. Had help, Jason answered, looking at Henry. The old scout nodded once, a lifetime of regret easing slightly in his eyes. Pastor Whitcomb stepped forward. The church will witness and record Judge Matthews' statement. The girl's rights to Half Moon. Creek will be protected. He smiled at Taya, with a proper guardian to watch over both her and the water. Jason kept his arm around Taya's shoulders as the townfolk gathered closer. Neighbors who had once turned away now offered hesitant greetings. Children shyly waved at Taya. The wall of prejudice had cracked, letting light through. Judge Matthews approached, hat in hand. I'll make this right, he said quietly. File the proper papers. See justice done. Much obliged, Jason answered. But the real justice was done here today. Truth came to light. The judge nodded slowly. Sometimes a man needs reminding what truth looks like. He paused. God have mercy on us all. He does, Jason said. Every day. The morning sun climbed higher, turning Half Moon Creek to silver. Its waters ran clear and strong, singing ancient songs of life and hope. On its banks, a family had been restored, a community had found its conscience, and truth had defeated lies. Taya tugged Jason's sleeve, pointing to where wild roses bloomed along the water. Together they walked down to gather them, their shadows merging in the golden light. Behind them, Henry and the townsfolk began dismantling the railroad's camp, erasing all trace of darkness from this sacred place. The morning sun warmed their faces as Jason held Taya close, his weathered hands trembling against her small shoulders. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks, matching the ones that streaked her dusty face. Neither spoke for a long moment, letting the gentle sound of Half Moon Creek wash over them. My daughter, Jason finally whispered, his voice rough with emotion. My precious daughter. Taya pressed her face into his chest, her fingers clutching his worn shirt. Father, she answered in Apache, then in English, casting the sacred word in both tongues. Around them, the townsfolk who had witnessed the confrontation shifted uncertainly, caught between their lingering prejudices and the undeniable power of the scene before them. Mrs. Henderson, who had once crossed the street to avoid Taya, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Tom Wilson, the blacksmith, cleared his throat gruffly and looked away, though his own eyes glistened. Pastor Whitcomb stepped forward, his Bible held reverently in both hands. Brothers and sisters, he called out, his voice carrying across the creek bank. Let us gather here, where God's waters flow, and bear witness to his mighty works this day. The townspeople drew closer, forming a rough circle near the water's edge. Henry Keene remained slightly apart, his old scout's instincts keeping him watchful, though his usually hard expression had softened. Lord, Pastor Whitcomb began, raising his hands toward heaven, we stand on holy ground beside waters you created, to sustain all your children. We have seen your justice prevail, your truth shine forth, and your love triumph over fear and hatred. Amen. Several voices murmured. We dedicate this creek to your care, asking your blessing on its waters and on those who shall steward it. The pastor turned toward Taya, who stood straight and solemn beside Jason. We ask your special blessing on this child, whom you have protected and delivered. May Half Moon Creek flow strong and true under guardianship as it has since time. Beyond memory, Taya whispered something in Apache, a traditional blessing for water, passed down through generations. Though few understood the words, several people nodded, recognizing the reverence in her tone. And now, Pastor Whitcomb continued, we witness another of your miracles, the making of a family. He smiled warmly at Jason. Brother Boone, do you have words to share? Jason cleared his throat, unused to speaking before crowds, but his voice rang clear and strong across the water. Folks, you all know me. Known me since Sarah and little Mary passed on. Known how empty my life's been, he drew Taya closer. But God sent me this child, led me to her in ashes and smoke, and I aim to make it proper and legal before you all today. He turned to face Taya fully, kneeling despite his injured ribs to meet her eyes. Taya, will you be my daughter? Will you let me adopt you? Proper and formal, joining our lives and lands together? Taya's dark eyes shone with tears and joy. Yes, she said clearly. Yes, Father. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson openly wept now, and even crusty old Tom Wilson snuffled suspiciously. Then, before God and these witnesses, Jason declared, I claim you as my daughter, heir to Boone Ranch and Half Moon Creek both. Two streams joining as one, just like our hearts. Pastor Whitcomb raised his hands again. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Amen. The response came strong and unified from the gathered townsfolk. Henry Keene watched. From his position near the cottonwoods, his weather-beaten face softening. Decades of regret over his part in campaigns against the Apache seemed to ease slightly as he witnessed this healing moment. It caught Jason's eye and nodded once. A gesture. Heavy with meaning. As the formal ceremony concluded, the mood lightened. Neighbors who had once shunned them now pressed forward to offer congratulations. Mrs. Wilson promised to bring by a quilt she'd been saving. The Henderson boys asked if Taya might join their fishing expeditions. Even Sheriff Taylor, looking somewhat abashed, offered a gruff welcome to the newest citizen of our community. Time we were heading back, Pastor Whitcomb announced as the sun climbed higher. Martha's preparing a proper celebration at our home. The ride back to town felt different from any before. Kaya rode proudly beside Jason on Dusty, no longer hidden or afraid. Townsfolk flanked them like an honor guard, dust rising from their horses' hooves in the golden afternoon light. "Look there," Henry said quietly, riding up beside them. He pointed to where Hawk soared overhead, circling twice, before heading toward the mountains. "Apache sign of blessing," he explained. "The old ones would say your path is watched over." Taya smiled up at the hawk, whispering a traditional word of thanks. Jason squeezed her shoulder, marveling at how naturally she bridged both worlds. The Whitcomb home buzzed with activity when they arrived. Martha Whitcomb had outdone herself, the tables groaning with food contributed by suddenly generous neighbors. Fried chicken, cornbread, 3 kinds of pie, and enough side dishes to feed half the territory covered every available surface. "Welcome home, dear," Martha said warmly, embracing Taya. "Welcome to the family. All our families." The house filled quickly as more townspeople arrived, bringing additional dishes and well wishes. Children darted between adults' legs, no longer segregating themselves from Taya. Their laughter mixed with the general cheerful chaos of community gathering. After the meal, as afternoon stretched toward evening, Martha brought out her piano hymnal. "Taya," she called, "would you lead us in song? I hear you know both English and Apache versions of Amazing Grace." A hush fell over the crowded parlor. Taya looked uncertainly at Jason, who nodded encouragement. She stood slowly, smoothing her calico dress with trembling hands. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each word, the English verses rolling sweetly through the room. Then she shifted to Apache, the ancient language lending new depth to the familiar melody. The 2 versions twined together, building like the waters of Half Moon Creek, separate streams joining to form something stronger and more beautiful than either alone. Jason felt tears streaming down his face again, but he made no move to hide them. All around the room, he saw others similarly affected. Even Henry Keene, standing in his usual spot near the door, wiped roughly at his eyes. Unable to contain his heart any longer, Jason joined in, his deep baritone supporting Taya's clear tones. Others followed, first Martha Whitcomb, then the pastor, then the whole room lifting their voices in harmony. The last notes faded into reverent silence. Taya turned to Jason, her face glowing with joy and belonging. He gathered her close, this miracle child who had brought him back to life. "Your barn," Tom Wilson spoke up suddenly. "It'll need rebuilding before winter. I reckon we could get a crew together, have it up in no time." "Count me in," called another voice. "And me. I've got timber you can use. Martha and I can mine Taya." "While you work," Mrs. Henderson offered. The offers kept coming. Food, labor, materials, childcare. The same community that had once turned its back now opened its arms, transformed by love and truth. "Much obliged," Jason managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Much obliged to you all." Pastor Whitcomb raised his hands for attention. "Friends, we've witnessed more than the making of one family today. We've seen our whole community renewed. Let us be worthy of this blessing." "Amen," Henry said from his post by the door. It was the first time anyone had heard him say the word. Outside, the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Another day was ending in the territory, but for Jason and Taya, it felt like a new dawn. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges, but they would face them together, supported by their newfound community. They had come so far from that cold morning when Jason found a dying child in a burnt wagon. Through ashes and prejudice, through danger and doubt, they had forged a bond stronger than blood. Now, surrounded by the warmth of acceptance and the sweet sounds of hymns, they were finally truly home. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Thune Ranch as neighbors gathered to rebuild what hatred had destroyed. The sound of hammers rang through the crisp morning air, punctuated by friendly shouts and laughter. Jason watched from the porch, his heart full, as a dozen men hoisted the first beam of his new barn skyward. Tom Wilson directed the raising with experienced eyes. Little more to the left, boys. Steady now. The massive timber settled perfectly into place, and a cheer went up from the workers. Near the garden, Martha Whitcomb and several other women had set up tables laden with stews, cornbread, and pies. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted across the yard, mixing with the sweet scent of sawdust. "Smells mighty fine," Henry Keene commented, pausing in his work. The old scout had proved surprisingly skilled with carpentry tools, his weathered hands. Steady and sure on the saw, children darted between the workers' legs, making a game of gathering drop nails. Taya ran among them, her dark braids flying as they chased escaped chickens back toward their temporary pen. Her laughter, bright and free, made Jason's eyes mist over. Just weeks ago, she'd been too frightened to speak above a whisper. "Pa!" she called out, waving excitedly. "Look what Jimmy Henderson taught me." She whistled sharply, and one of the ranch dogs came bounding over, tail wagging. "Well done, sweetheart," Jason replied, his heart warming at the word "pa" from her lips. It felt right. Natural as breathing now. The women called everyone to dinner, and work paused as the community gathered to share the feast. Jason bowed his head as Pastor Whitcomb offered thanks, feeling the truth of every word about brotherhood and God's provision. "Never seen a barn raising go so quick," Tom Wilson remarked around the mouthful of beef stew. "Reckon we'll have her." Closed in before sunset. "The Lord provides willing hands," Martha Whitcomb added, passing a basket of fresh rolls as the afternoon wore on. Jason worked alongside his neighbors despite his healing ribs. Every lift and hammer stroke reminded him of the violence that had threatened his family, but each pain now felt like victory. They had stood against hatred and won. The sun was sinking toward the western mesas when the last roof beam settled into place. The new barn stood proud and strong, larger than the old one. Already the sweet smell of fresh hay filled its shadowy interior. "That'll do," Henry said quietly, looking up at their work. "That'll surely do." As twilight deepened, the workers began heading home, leaving behind promises to return tomorrow for the sighting. Jason stood in his doorway, watching lanterns bob away across the darkening land. Inside, lamplight spilled warm and golden across scrubbed wooden floors. Taya sat at the kitchen table, carefully tracing letters in a primer Mrs. Henderson had brought. The light caught the simple wooden cross, hanging on the wall behind her, casting gentle shadows. That cross had hung there through all the lonely years after Sarah and Mary died. Now it watched over a home renewed by love and laughter. Dusty nickered contentedly from the corral, where fresh water and oats awaited. The evening stars began appearing one by one, brilliant in the deep blue sky. Jason remembered countless nights spent staring up at those same stars, aching with grief and solitude. Now each one seemed to shine with promise. "Time for supper, daughter," he said softly. They sat together at the table, heads bowed over simple fare. Beans, cornbread, and the last of Martha's apple pie. Jason's prayer of thanks came from deep in his soul. "Lord, you've turned our mourning into dancing," he whispered. "You've given us family where we thought all was lost. Thank you for bringing light from ashes, hope from despair. Amen." "Ah," Taya echoed, her small hand reaching for his across the table. Later, as crickets sang their evening chorus outside, Jason tucked Taya into bed. She clutched the scorched Bible they'd recovered from the wagon wreck, its pages still bearing faint smoke stains. But like them, it had survived, Its truth unmarred by fire. Can we read the psalm about still waters again? She asked sleepily. Jason smiled, settling into the chair beside her bed. The same chair where he'd kept vigil that first night, when she was a frightened stranger. Now she was his daughter in every way that mattered. "The Lord is my shepherd," he began, his deep voice gentle in the lamplight. "I shall not want." Taya's eyes drifted closed. Her fingers still curled around the Bible. That book had started as evidence of her inheritance, proof of her claim to Half Moon Creek. Now it symbolized so much more. Survival against odds, justice prevailing over greed, and most of all, the mystery of how God could forge new beginnings from endings. Jason tucked the quilt more securely around her shoulders. "You're home now, daughter," he whispered, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "You're home now and always. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow, we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.